This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. On the show, you'll hear from leading Australian business owners as they share the lessons they've learned building their companies. You'll learn from their successes as well as some of the challenges they faced along the way. We also talk to experts from a range of fields who share specialised techniques you can use to improve your business. I'm your host, Savan Tuna, and I'm a director at Alexander Spencer, and I'm really passionate about helping Australian businesses succeed. Understanding what really drives people, their motivations, behaviours, and blind spots is something every good leader should get a handle on. But it's not easy. And when it comes to hiring and leading teams, it's rarely just about what's on the resume. It's about what's going on beneath the surface. Joining us today on The Bottom Line is John Vilianiotis, a specialist consultant psychologist with over 20 years of experience helping boards, executives, and leadership teams get to the bottom of human behaviour. In this episode, we're digging into the red and green flags to look for in interviews, how to separate gut feel from unconscious bias, and what it really takes to build strong, inclusive, and high-performing teams. Let's get into it. John, welcome to The Bottom Line.
Thanks, Savan. Nice to be here.
I'm really excited for this episode. Being an accountant and in professional services, there's a big chunk of what we do involves making sure we get the right people. And I'm really excited to have you on the show and really dive deep into all your knowledge that you've accumulated over the years. But before we get to that, and for those, who don't know who you are and your skills and your background, let's take us through a journey of John.
Well, I'm a psychologist and I've been lucky enough to have a pretty exciting, diverse career in psychology because I work both in private practice, but I also do a lot of work with organisations. So what we might call a business psychologist or corporate psychologist. So I cover both areas and I have done that throughout my career. And obviously today I'm excited to be able to come here and talk with you and perhaps provide some insight into your clients, into what I do, the mystery of psychology, especially in that area where we're dealing with businesses and people at work and leadership and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know you're big into that. You do facilitate, strategy days for businesses. You facilitate many sort of business consultation stuff. So take us through that, the intersection between business and psychology. You're a unique service offering there. How did those two worlds collide for you?
First of all, I'm always someone that loves to keep learning, so I haven't stopped studying. But as I mentioned, I've been lucky enough at the beginning of my career, I entered the discipline in psychology working as a counsellor in what we call EAP programs, employee assistance programs. So my first exposure as a psychologist was working as a counsellor for businesses and organisations. And I would go in and meet with people and they would get to know me. And then if they needed to talk about issues or problems at work or at home, I would be the person that they could reach out to. That allowed me to work as a psychologist, but also to start to understand the environment of organisations, and I would go into all industries and all sectors. And so slowly, I started to develop some expertise in understanding what organisations go through, the challenges of people, the challenges of getting the right people in, creating the right roles, the strategy of what we need to achieve and how do our people and what kind of skills and capabilities and talent do we need to achieve our strategy as a business. So that kind of opens up that world of human resources and functions like that, people and culture, which I got some exposure to as well. Do a few more degrees and then get to the point where I am starting to be consulted for advice to business leaders. And that started to become more of, we think you've got some insight for us into other areas of how we become successful as an organisation. So hence some of the strategy days and facilitating, but also having done an MBA as well, being able to offer some of those sort of tools and methodologies, in particular to smaller business owners who don't have the full sort of suite of functions around them. So they can, I can probably help and assist them in that respect.
Every hiring journey has an interview process, but as we know, what's on paper doesn't always match what's in front of us, right? What are some of the red flags you've learned to trust over the years that suggest something deeper might be going on? So can you sort of take us through some examples or?
Yeah, look, typically I think, and this is where we get to some of the expertise in terms of what I do. In my involvement for selection decisions, I'm asked to bring in those extra insights. As you said, maybe there's some red flags, maybe there's something that we don't quite get a sense of with regards to the candidate and their background and experience and capabilities. So I do get involved in developing or designing assessment solutions, which will include what we call psychometrics. This is an example of what we would consider very bad science. It's a phrenology bust. Actual fact, Savan, this was used to purportedly, determine or assess people's traits and capabilities. And interestingly enough, I have seen a report from an Australian psychologist from the 60s that applied this method, this technique. It's a pseudoscience, of course, and there's nothing backing it. But I think it's a good reminder because what I do is actually create an assessment for people, and it is, you need to take it seriously. We're asking for information. We're testing people in terms of their abilities, their capabilities, how they reason, how they think through things. We're also seeking to gather information about their character traits, their drivers, their interests, their motivators, and then any red flags. Is there anything that's going to be highlighted that we need to be aware of? So we use different types of assessments, personality tests, cognitive abilities tests, interviews, of course. So we structure those deep, in-depth behavioural interviews to sort of try to get to confirm or validate some of the things that we're seeing in the psychometrics. And so it's a fairly rigorous and in-depth process. And then, of course, comes the experience and the understanding, as I said, of working with companies and organisations and understanding what they're looking for, sometimes help clarifying for them what is it that you're actually looking for so that we can target our assessment methodology appropriately to try to uncover that detail or that information.
Let's say if we can take us through a journey. So we're a small business that looks at hiring someone, and let's say it's a senior management or senior exec team. Take us through what the steps should be for a really good process. So we talked about defining what role they're looking at filling, getting the capabilities right. So there's obviously a lot of preliminary work before you even go to market. Can you take us through the go to market, and then you talked about testing and then the interview process? Is the testing done before, the interview later? Briefly outline the best way to roll a proper process out for our listeners.
I will, and you're right. It is a thorough process with a few steps along the way. Obviously, the organisation, I think, kind of knows what they need in terms of we need this job. We need someone to come and do this job. Hopefully, they've already got that kind of clarified in terms of the structure of the organisation and, in particular, certain leadership positions, which are really important. But what they may not be clear on is what we call the success profile for the role. What does success look like? And what will we be measuring? Because it's not just about the job, it's also what type of person and what type of experience and what type of leadership traits and what type of abilities and competencies are needed to be effective and successful in this job within this company. And so that's where the initial part of the process is, I think, helping organisations develop that success profile so that they're clear on what they're looking for, and it also points us in the right direction of then designing the appropriate assessment battery, we call it, group of assessments to try to get that information through our process, which will include, or most often includes, an in-depth interview. The assessments that I select, I'm accredited in a whole range of tools, psychometric tools. So Again, depending on the success profile and what we're looking for, I'll determine which assessments are the most appropriate ones. And then we'll get in contact with the candidates and we'll brief them on what to expect. Most people have done this type of thing now because it's very common, especially if you're working in larger organisations, which is fairly routine. Not just for selection, but also for development purposes, right? And career progression. So we'll determine what the psychometric component looks like, and I'll be in touch with the candidate and brief them, and then we'll set it up and they can complete the psychometrics online before the interview. Okay. I think it's better for me to have some of the data to, again, shape the way I'm asking certain questions or probing for information in the interview. Some of the interviews I do last for 2 hours, so it's pretty in-depth. The interviews are typically well structured around the competencies for the role, again, the success profile, the culture, and we're looking for experience, we're looking for capability, and we're looking for, what motivates the individual. Why are you interested in this particular role with this company? And sometimes that's probably, where people haven't thought about it, maybe enough to justify. There's plenty of roles at any one point in time. So what brings you here? What is it about this role? And how does it fit in terms of your career trajectory? Because we're dealing with senior people, so we want to make sure that they're really motivated. And so that part of the interview process is typically done in depth with myself. Usually there's a second person involved as well. From that, I then start to assess all the data and bring together the key themes, extracting the information we need or my client needs to be able to help them support their decision making. It's rarely the case, Sivan, that an organisation is going to say, you know what, look what the psychologist said, that's it, yes or no. That's not the case at all. And I think sometimes we need to be really clear with the people that we're working with to put them at ease, that this is just another source of data and they shouldn't feel like it will be the defining piece of information for a decision. And certainly when I'm debriefing my client, the organisation, I'm also making sure that they don't kind of tend to think that what I produce as the report is the final word.
Yes, yeah.
However, they are paying and asking for an expert opinion. So I am prepared to back up my insights, but I'm justified in saying we use these tools, we profiled the role, this is what you're looking for, and here's the data from my process that supports this.
And that 2-hour interview, I'm assuming, is sort of the first interview post the psychometric testing. Do you follow it up with a second interview? Is that overkill? Is there any benefit in that?
Not where I'm involved. Yep. Yeah. The organisation itself would have to be doing their own preliminary interview with their key stakeholders, the decision makers for the role. Their HR partner might be involved for sure. And then typically what happens, Sivan, is once they've narrowed down a field of candidates to the 2 or 3 short list, that's when I get involved. They'll want me to come in at that point and say, okay, at that point they should be fairly confident that they're getting the experience that they need. You won't get through to that level if you're not experienced. Then they come and they say, John, we're looking for your insights now. What are you going to uncover for us about the leadership traits, the behaviours, the capabilities that we can't get or haven't gotten yet through our initial interviews?
One of the things that, I've been doing interviews for a long time. No one really taught me. We just wing it. And, I should have kept a counter on how many interviews I've actually done. We've got one tomorrow with an accountant. We had one yesterday with a graduate. So just this week I've had 2. So I'd say it'd be over 100 interviews I've been involved in. I haven't been to too many interviews myself, but I've been on the other seat. I find that a fair chunk of it, you do all the processes, but then it really goes to me. I really go by my gut and I'm like, do I like that person? Is there a connection there? Obviously, we've got to tick the box on the capability. So I think business owners are pretty good, I think. If you're good at what you do, you can generally identify if someone else is good at that. So an accountant can figure out if another accountant's good or bad, or an engineer can generally tell that they can find good and bad engineers. I always say I can I played soccer growing up. I always say I could tell if someone's a good soccer player just by the way they would kick the first ball because you just know. But what really we struggle with is that fit, that we're going to get along, what type of person. I think that's where I think we're talking about the psychology of it. I've been doing that by gut, John, and you bring it to another level. How much does that gut really play?
I think, the gut instinct, that intuition, it is important because, with experience comes understanding of your industry, understanding of the profession, the specialist skill sets that you require to be effective and successful. So you can observe those things pretty quickly. Anyone who's experienced can use their intuition initially to sort of pick up on, oh, I see the skill and I see the knowledge and some of that expertise. But we also have to be really aware, and psychology has illustrated, research in psychology certainly shows us that we are susceptible as humans to lots of biases, confirmation bias, that kind of thing, recency bias. So even though we're probably confident in seeing the things we recognise, we're also then likely to be sometimes unaware of the biases of saying, oh, I like this person, but why? What is it? Maybe I'm biased because I'm seeing something that I just like, and that's not a good criteria for a decision that I'm going to make. So we want to perhaps take away some of that bias as well through this process of objective assessment, where we're saying, okay, these are the traits that are important for leadership in our organisation. Let's get a second opinion because I think I might be seeing them. But everyone comes into an interview doing their best, right? Putting their best foot forward.
It's like the first date, right?
It's like, exactly. You've scrubbed up and you're looking fantastic and, you're on your best behaviour. So it's unlikely that we're going to sort of see what happens to someone under pressure, what their natural style might be in terms of some of those traits. As I said, are they going to be really communicating openly, or are they going to be a little bit reserved and guarded? Sometimes you can get a sense of that in an interview. In fact, you should be able to get a sense of it, but the assessments provide a deeper level of data around that. And again, as you said, you like to probably wing it, and that's how that's how you've progressed. But it's good to have a bit of structure and process in place, isn't it, where
100%.
You've spent some time, you've consulted with your leadership team and other relevant stakeholders in the organisation, and they've contributed and they said, we're looking for this. We want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to get the information that we need to make a sound decision.
It's interesting. Let's talk about some of the interview questions. I don't know if I'm sure you've got plenty of them and you've got a whole list that you would go through, but do you have a go-to interview question that may reveal just a little bit more than what it seems? That, what kind of answers are you listening for? What are some of the things that you go, I'm going to ask this question, and if you can share that one with me, and then this is what I'm looking for, and this tells me X, Y, and Z. I'd love for you to take us through an example of a question and what it is you're looking for and how this all plays out.
So typically, the questions are kind of covering 3 or 4 key areas. One is how people interact with other people, their people skills and style as a leader, the way that they operate and get results, their application of what they can do. So that results kind of series of questions, the way they think about problems, think about their industry, solutions, that kind of thing. So that's that thought leadership. And then the fourth area is generally around how they manage change and deal with pressure themselves and adapt. So if you ask anyone, are you adaptable? They'll say, yeah, I am, right?
Yeah.
And same with, do you think that you're a good communicator? People say, yeah, I communicate really effectively, right? But when you start to kind of request an example, so the thing about the interview process is a behavioural interview will ask for specific examples. If you're not prepared to offer an example and talk us through it, then we're just saying, well, that's just a hypothetical response. It's a generic response. So, for instance, in the example of adaptive behaviour, they'll probably talk about the situation and what they did in terms of, I needed to do this and I needed to do that. But what is it that you actually did to adapt your approach? So once you start going into requesting that level of detail for them, if they haven't done it or they're not really adaptive, then it'll be exposed. They won't be able to sort of give you the response, the answer that you're looking for. Whereas someone who's really self-aware and knows and has adapted and has changed and has stretched themselves and, beyond their comfort zone, they're pretty much going to tell you, you know what, this is the way I used to approach things, and I used to do A, B, C, and D. And then in this situation, none of that was effective. So what I needed to do was communicate differently, interact with people differently, invest more. So they'll actually go down and talk about the detail of their adaptive response because they know what they're talking about.
No, I like that. And in terms of not so much honesty and integrity, like how do you get, like people like we talked about, people show up with their best version. There's so many tools out there now that, I mean, I'm going to go to a video I saw online where you'd love at this, but people are so well trained now and there's so much resources on how to answer. And they probably, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but they probably even know the questions that are going to get fired at them. Do you feel like it's getting harder and harder to actually figure this out, whether candidates are being honest, truthful, or you've done this long enough to go, you can call it bullshit?
I think you're right there, Savan. This is where my experience level at this point is, I think, what's valued by clients because I've sat in thousands of interviews. And to tell you the truth, I know what you're saying. There's a lot of information out there for people and they can prepare and they can come in really giving it their best shot if they've done all the background preparation. But it's rarely the case that that's what happens. You'd be surprised. I interview some of the top executives and I'm still surprised at how little preparation they've put into something that's so important from a decision that affects them. So I feel, first of all, people are underprepared. So it's unlikely that they're going to, sort of swindle me with with magic tricks and things that they've kind of done in the background. You can sort of pick when people are spinning a story, again, because I've got the ability to, in 2 hours, really just drill in. And if you're at the receiving end of one of my interviews, Savan, I think you'll be sweating at the end of it.
I love it.
Because if I'm not satisfied with your response, again, I'll dig deeper and I'll dig deeper and I'll dig deeper. And if you don't have that experiences, it'll be exposed. You just won't know where to go to give me the level of detail I'm looking for.
I love that.
So it's pretty hard to pull the wool over my eyes, let's say.
Do you tell them you're a psychologist? Because I feel all of a sudden I'm nervous now, John.
I think most people know at this point, when it comes to my process that I'm a psychologist. As I mentioned, it's usually going to be, I need to make sure that I'm briefing people properly to what they can expect because I am a registered professional and psychometric testing is an intervention into someone. So we need to give people information and they need to consent to it. So I can't just not tell them things. I have to be honest. But I don't necessarily sit there at the beginning of the interview and then say, guess what, I'm a psychologist. So you better be careful because
get the tissue box out. We might go down a different path here.
That's right, yeah.
That's cool. I do want to show you a little video because we're of a different generation, John. It's funny because I think we ended up going to the same primary school many moons ago. But the world has changed. And I've got to show you this TikTok that's been flying around. So, John, let's watch this video. This is something I saw online recently where the technology is coming into play, the interview process. And I want to know what your thoughts are on this.
So now tell me about a time when you were in charge of a project with a deadline. Which was the project and how did you meet the deadline?
Yeah, that's a good question. Give me a second to think about it. So I'd like to highlight a situation where at some aerospace company, I was responsible for using applications that were becoming a bottleneck, causing usability issues and slowing down performance. So my task overall was to redesign and implement these updates to these applications, improving their usability and cutting the runtime performance by at least 50%. So to tackle this, I initiated a series of design review meetings, engaging a diverse team of over 20 members to gather inputs and overall just meticulously kept up with everything. And as a result, by systematically upgrading the source code and integrating feedback from cross-functional teams, we achieved a significant improvement, reducing the application's runtime by 50%.
So what do you reckon?
Fantastic, isn't it?
Great answer, that one.
That's fantastic. Straight off the AI generated response. I can probably sense that it is a scripted response, and to me, a little bit evident that they're reading from a screen in terms of their delivery is quite mechanical. That's me who does this all the time for a living. If you haven't, then you're probably thinking, well, okay, that's pretty detailed and thorough. And so I wouldn't leave it like that. I'd probably start, as I said, I'd start to probe and I'd start to ask for specifics. Who was it that you did? Who were you reporting to?
There we go.
And so at that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
Plug in AI and say, give me the name of the chief executive or the functional leader at the time. So in my role, I have to be prepared as well. I've done my research and I've read their CV and I've read their psychometrics and everything. So it'll be a whole kind of web that they'll have to try to escape out of if they're trying to do that through an AI-assisted response. Maybe in the future when AI is really tapping into your brain straight away, they'll be able to get away with it, but not quite yet.
Have you ever had a gut feeling during an interview or a client engagement that turned out completely right or wrong? And what did the experience teach you?
It'll be more surprising if my gut feeling is wrong, but that would have been the case earlier on. And again, it's probably just because we make judgments pretty quickly, right? As soon as we see someone. Like it's within that first, the first thing they say, the handshake, whatever it might be. Unfortunately now, because we're no longer doing a lot of this face-to-face, we're missing out on a lot of that context of body language and so forth. So sometimes I might make a judgment that I think someone's really reserved and they're not engaging. But it turns out that if you ask other people, and this has been the case, it's like, well, they're not really engaging, they're not effective communicators. And then you speak to some people that they've worked with and they'll say they're the best that I've ever dealt with. And if you're interacting face-to-face in person with someone, for a lot of people, they're uncomfortable with this remote, And so I've got to be aware that maybe I'm not seeing the best, the most comfortable, the most natural style when I'm dealing with people. And they're on a screen in another country and it could be midnight over there. So all of those things I think I've started to really think about and take into consideration to just sort of say, is that your impression or a judgment that you just made quickly? So it doesn't happen as often now, Sivan, because of that experience again,
Now, we talk about cultural fit and culture quite a bit. The phrase culture fit is often used in hiring. But some people say it's just a polite cover for bias. How can leaders genuinely build inclusive teams without falling into the trap of hiring people just because they like them? That question of, hey, this guy looks, I like him. Maybe it's because we get along, but it's not the right. So that we talk about this culture and take us and unpack that a little bit around your thoughts.
It's an interesting one, culture, because I think sometimes it's really hard to determine what it is, what it looks like, or put the words to it. You definitely know that there's a culture, right, whether you want it or not. And whether you think it's the culture that you're aiming for, you still know that there's a culture that exists in an organisation. Whenever two or more people come together, something happens that is more than just the individual. So there is some type of culture that exists. Now, most of the time, you're looking to create a certain culture. And again, you're probably thinking, what justifies our decision that this is the culture we need? And what are the people that we're trying to bring in to shape that culture? So I think it probably is a little bit about, if you're going to sort of resist your natural biases, you probably want to do a little bit of that work up front in thinking, is this the business requirement? Is this what the business needs as a culture, or is this what I like? And it shouldn't be just what you like, because the business is its own entity and it needs to achieve certain goals, and the leader or the founder may have a way of working or thinking about the business that was relevant at a particular point in time, but it can't be relevant throughout the evolution of a business. As you know, it grows and it changes and it shifts, and it needs new thinking and new talent and so forth. So the culture will always be hopefully changing and developing. But you're right, if you haven't thought about what you want it to look like, you'll probably be looking at bringing in people that you just feel you like, and not getting a sense of, are they going to contribute to shaping the culture that we think we need in the future?
What's one belief about people or human behavior at work that's changed for you over the years as you've done more of this work?
I don't know whether it's changed, but it's definitely the case, 100%, that if you lack interest, you've got to like what you do, definitely. Job satisfaction, right? Reward, satisfaction, sense of achievement. You actually have to like the job, but you also have to like the environment that you're doing that job in. The two have to be aligned. If one or the other is, or both are negatives, then you're not going to have a good experience. And so this is where I suppose my other experience working in private practice, I deal with a lot of people who come to me because they're having mental health issues. And a lot of it, the people that I work with, the clients that I work with, is because of their poor and working environment for whatever reason, dissatisfaction with where they are in their career, stress with regards to the job itself, the expectations. So for me, it's been something that I know happiness in life has got a lot to do with whether you're interested, motivated and engaged in your work and in the organisation, the environment that you're working in.
We genuinely ask a lot of questions, sometimes at the start, sometimes at the end, maybe even in the middle, around people's hobbies, interests. Tell us stuff about what I can't read in your resume. Tell me everything about that you haven't written down, because we just want to get to know that. And you just mentioned it a little bit just then. Take us through why that's important. How do we ask those questions? What are we looking for there?
I think it is important to get a sense of that other dimension of someone, right? Outside of work, what is it that you do? Sometimes it's actually really important because it'll give you information about some of their attributes, right? Whether they're competitive, whether they're driven. Because, people that are high performers, for instance, usually, you'll ask them, what do you do outside of work? And they're all running marathons and doing triathlons, right? So you get a sense of that achievement drive and that motivation when you find out about what people do outside of work. It's also important to think about if they don't have, well, they should likely have a life outside of work, because that's going to help their resilience in the long term, their work-life balance. That's a phrase we all use, but I know, having seen people who are really at the top of the leadership pyramid, who are very effective and very resilient, that's because they have a decent life and series of interests and hobbies that can help them switch off. You want to come back to work being totally switched on, and that means switching off outside of work, doing something else, using a part of your brain that you're not using at work as well, right? You come to work, you're probably making the same decisions over and over again. That's your profession. What are you doing outside of work that helps you think more creatively, perhaps? So all of those things can be a good part of the interview, and get that information from people for sure.
And what about ethnic background? I know that, there's certain ethnic backgrounds that have cultural things that might shape the way they think, the way that they dress. Religion is a factor. Take us through sort of how important that is in Australia with a multicultural. And can you give us some insights in certain religions or even backgrounds that have or is it just too general and we just need to look at the human underlying what they are?
It's not general. I mean, it does come through in my work where I do see some of those cultural attributes or traits that people bring because of the culture, right? I'm not going to venture into any specifics, but I'm a migrant myself, and I'm sure people see some of that in me. In Australia, and not only in Australia, generally, again, if I'm dealing with leadership roles, there is an expectation that people show an awareness of cultural differences and be able to both recognise, hey, what can we sort of do to protect certain cultural sort of attributes and behaviours that are there, but also clearly indicate that this is what the role is requiring. And sometimes, it could be difficult. In particular, sometimes male-female interactions, in certain cultures are really sort of more difficult to navigate if you're not experienced in them. So for Australia, because we're exposed to so many different cultures, I think we're at an advantage of being able to work with that. But even in work that I do, and as I said, I do get involved with people overseas. So most of the time at this level, people will volunteer it. They'll talk about it openly, Sivan. They'll say, look, it's part of my culture, and I have to be aware of this because this affects the way I interact with people, or this affects the way that I might be perceived as communicating or making decisions. So a lot of the time people are telling me they're volunteering that. And I think it's a sign of the sort of the global nature of dealing with senior leaders. You probably, if you haven't dealt with people in a different culture at this point, it's like, okay.
Something's all right.
Yeah, where have you been? Where have you been working? So I think it's expected these days to be able to manage that effectively. Yeah?
Agreed. I find there's a shift when someone gets, because we've got all different age profiles in the organisation. We have young people in their 20s, they've got girlfriends, they're partying, they're maybe living at home or with their friends, and they're going through their life journey. And I find, as you get older and mature, but there's significant stages in their life. So I see that the 30-year-old in a serious relationship, they get married and there's this switch. There's this maturity and there's just change in the way that they behave. I've seen it. We've had a lot of staff that have had babies for the first time, especially men. All of a sudden, they come to the office as more of a man, and I'm saying that broadly. So do we put any emphasis on the background of, are you married? Do you have kids? All that kind of stuff. Does that shape a human as well, those stages in life?
It does certainly shape a human, yeah, for sure. And I place a lot of emphasis on what the values and priorities for people, because as you've indicated, at different points in our life, our values change. When we're single, we're pretty self-interested. We're out there doing what we need to do, whether it's just focusing on our career or having a good time or meeting our future partner. Then when you do get settled and start to think about family, your values have changed. Your friends are no longer so important. Your immediate family is more important. The security and stability of your career is more important. So you're not going to be chopping and changing that much. You may become a bit more risk averse. Your values change. Do we use that information in a way? I think we need to get that information, and that is part of the methodology of understanding what drives people and what they value in work, right? So there are questionnaires that deal with that elicit that type of information. In an interview, I'm not necessarily going to say to someone, tell me how much time you spend night clubbing.
Yeah.
But, we are looking for what is important for people. What do they value at different parts of their journey and their life? And certainly it is important to think about, is that what they're bringing to work as well? Are they career-minded? Are they looking for advancement and development, or are they more about security and stability now because their priority is the young family?
I've got a couple more videos where we'll trial these, see how they go, just to see if we can get some content that might work. So these are just trials. So we may not post these. I just wanted to throw these out there to see what happens. I've got two more. I like this one. This is about culture, so we might insert this in the culture one. It's a short one.
God, this is gonna piss some people off, but I'm gonna say it. Personality hires are arguably more important than people that do actual work. Let me explain. Anyone can do work. Anyone can be a good employee. Anyone can go boop, 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 and then send an email. Anyone can do that. It takes a specific type of person to keep the company culture fun and funny and keep the office in good spirits. And that's where we come in. That's where personality hires come in. Because I solely got my corporate job from having a good personality. I had zero experience, but I made the people that I interviewed with laugh. And they were like, oh, we should hire this guy. So I'm going to stand by this statement, and it might piss some people off, but I stand by it. Personality hires are arguably more important than good workers.
All right. I want to know what your take is on that.
Yeah, look, he's got a point. there's something in there, and I think most experienced leaders in an organisation will understand what he's trying to say there, and they would tend to say something like hire for a person's character traits rather than their capability, because you can build the capability, right? If they've got a little bit of a gap, or maybe they don't have the right experience yet, that's something that can be developed. What's very difficult to develop or change is someone's underlying personality trait. Yeah. Character. That's what this person's trying to say. He's probably assuming that most cultures need to be like he wants them to be. It sounds like a party zone in there, right? Well, you're going to have fun and humour, and that's great if you got that, but some cultures don't want that.
Correct. I agree. I think we look at three things. I got taught this we did some leadership training with Cameron Schwab from Design CEO.
Yes, yeah.
He's amazing. And he looks at it on three metrics: character, capability, and connection. Mm-hmm. Character, obviously, we discussed around the ethos, the mindset, and all of that. And then capability, can you do the job? And then connection is just that personal connection, that connection piece. Can you make relationships? Can you interact with different types of people? That connection is really important. Is there a spark there? So they're the three things that we try to get out of an interview. And I agree, the character one, your hire on character, is so important.
Yeah, because, as we say, look, it's the most difficult thing is for someone to change who they are fundamentally. You do adjust certain character traits to suit the work and the role and the environment. But, if I'm naturally not trusting of people, then I'm certainly not going to change just because my job says, that's what you've got to do. So, as we said, he's probably right in what he's trying to say there, but maybe assuming that culture is the one that fits all organisations.
John, look, we could talk for hours. I've got so many questions I could ask you, but we've run out of time. It's been a masterclass in human behaviour. I know that people are going to listen to this and take so much out of just the thought process of how they interview. So I want to say thank you for your time. We've got some senior recruits happening. I know you're going to help us out behind the scenes. So watch out if you get interviewed by John at Alexander Spencer or any of the companies. One, your role's going to be important. But two, we're going to come with some hard-hitting questions there. So
they'll have the best experience with me, though.
That's true. That's true. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. This podcast was produced by accountancy firm Alexander Spencer. At Alexander Spencer, we've been helping business owners realise their goals since 1952, and we play a pivotal role in developing, implementing, and supervising the business goals and strategies of our clients. To find out how we can help your business succeed, head to our website, alexanderspencer.com.au. To make sure you don't miss an episode of The Bottom Line, be sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Savan Tuna, and we'll be back next episode with more tips to help you transform your business. And that's The Bottom Line.